How are you? Good. Samuel, you brought some company with you this morning. The chairman of the board of the Virginia Civics, John Sponsky, appears to be in the house, and Emily and Jan are with you. Mark's joined us back. We welcome everybody that's in the room. Emily and Jen invite me to come up and judge the state competition sometimes, but they started some virus to keep me from getting to come this time. I don't know what I had done to get thrown out so unceremoniously, but I'm glad that we survived it, and I'm glad everybody's here. Welcome back to Maggie Walker. Y'all are no stranger to this, but we're honored to be with you this morning. Samuel, are you well? Good. I'm glad to see you. Y'all introduce yourselves to us.
My name is Max Brody.
My name is Caroline Brickley.
I'm Emma Chun.
We're going to be doing this the whole time. Don't worry about it. That's fine. We have an alumnus of this program on this panel. Jocelyn, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Jocelyn Broman. I am an alumni of the program, competed in 2006. So for me, that was a long time ago. For others, maybe not so much. I currently work on Capitol Hill, and I work for Congressman Paul Cook of California.
Hi, I'm Francine Engel. I'm from the state of Maryland. I'm a political scientist and constitutional scholar. I work with the Maryland Council for Civic and History Education, and am a lecturer part-time at University of Maryland.
Wow. And I'm Mike Miles. I'm the county treasurer of Jefferson County, Alabama, which is Birmingham and 36 other communities. And I hope they're all behaving themselves this morning because I get to be here with you. We're delighted to be with you. We'll read the question quickly just so you can have a trigger mechanism to get started. This is question 3. I'm going to read it pretty quick to give you more time. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution provides that state legislatures can determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, yet gives Congress the power to make or alter such regulations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the uniform election process? What responsibility do state legislatures, state election officials, and citizens have in maintaining free and fair elections? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the trustee and delegate theories of representation as they apply to congressional districts? Thank you for all the hard work that you have done, that you always do traditionally at Maggie Walker, to enlighten us in this program. We're very thankful for you. Thank you for being with us this morning. And when you are ready, we look forward to hearing from you. You may begin.
In a 1774 speech to the electors of Bristol, Edmund Burke stated, "Your representative owes you, not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion." Burke supported the trustee model of representation, which assumes that representatives have a mandate to act as they see fit, even if their policy preferences differ from those of their constituents.
While this creates concerns about representatives pursuing their own selfish interests, trustee representation insulates against the majoritarian tyranny Madison warned against in Federalist 10. For example, House members Hilliard, Condit, and McKinney, who voted against Bush's popular Iraq War authorization and subsequently lost renomination bids, were later vindicated when it became clear that Iraq did not, in fact, have WMDs. Trustee representatives are especially valuable at a federal level, where their decisions often shape issues about which the general population has limited knowledge.
In contrast, representatives who subscribe to the delegate model follow their constituents' preferences, regardless of personal opinion. Representative Abigail Spanberger of the Virginia 7th District has proven willing to buck party caucus priorities in order to vote in line with her constituency. Yet this method is fraught with danger. Representatives who only vote how the majority of their constituents feel may support popular but unwise policies.
Nevertheless, neither model is effective without free and fair elections, the preservation of which lies in the hands of several entities. Within Congress's Article 1, Section 4 oversight and rulemaking, state legislatures set the time, place, and manner of their elections.
This means that state election officials also play a key role in ensuring that elections run smoothly and fairly, the importance of which was shown when Florida's recount battle in Bush v. Gore created widespread scrutiny over election legitimacy.
Elections can't be free or fair without the people's participation. Citizens can take a direct role in shaping elections. For example, in 2018, voters in Maine pushed an initiative past the state Supreme Court and legislature to implement the nation's first statewide ranked choice voting system.
Because the structure and administration of elections is at the state's discretion, U.S. election processes are fairly decentralized and non-uniform. This has several advantages, one of which is a resistance to large-scale hacking. The decentralized election system also allows different regions to innovate and adapt to local preferences, as seen in Oregon's mail-only voting system.
Still, America's state and local-centric electoral system has its drawbacks. Poor staffing at polling locations and widely varying procedures in different localities lead to the loss of hundreds of thousands of votes each election cycle, including an estimated 1 million votes in the 2000 presidential election.
The potential advantages of a more uniform set of election rules are numerous. First, it would decrease election abuses at the local level. In 2018, the 9th District congressional election in North Carolina had to be rerun when local enforcement failed to detect a massive abuse of the state's absentee laws. With tighter national administration oversight and stricter congressionally mandated rules, it will be more difficult for local failures such as this to occur.
A more uniform system would also help prevent civil rights abuses, just as unifying certain voting practices with the Voting Rights Act of 1964 did. This act, enabled by Article 1, Section 4 and the 14th and 15th Amendments, unified voting regulations in all states by prohibiting literacy tests and other voting barriers. Similarly, the passage of the 24th Amendment in 1964 made unconstitutional a poll tax for any level of election.
The United States should continue the unification of its election process begun by the Voting Rights Act, NVRA, and HAVA. First, acceptable forms of voter ID laws should be decided at the national level. The U.S. should also follow Wisconsin's lead and mandate that all states expand absentee availability to all voters.
For elected officials to represent their constituents effectively, ideally through the trustee model, elections must be free and fair. No system is free and fair when it presents enormous barriers to participation or opportunities for failure and abuse.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Mike.
Mike, you're on mute.
Well, let's start this, and while Mike gets off mute, we'll do, you said the trustee was probably the most beneficial, but what kind of congressperson do you actually want? Do you want a trustee or do you want a delegate?
I believe that the trustee model is definitely more beneficial for constituents around the country because trustee representatives are encouraged to not only act in the good of their constituents, but rather in the good of everyone in the country. And there are institutional checks against excessive trustee representation in Article 1, Sections 2 and 3 with the term limits for the House and Senate.
Additionally, with an increasingly globalized and homogenized world where much of American culture is both diverse but not necessarily geographically different, I think it makes much more sense for representatives to act in a more trustee way so that they can benefit the nation as a whole rather than simply their own constituents.
So you're okay with a representative that votes opposing to your values all the time?
I think that there are protections against an excessive trustee delegate in Article 1, Section 2 and 3 based on the term limits. If a representative gets too far away from what I believe then and what their constituents believe, then there are means to elect someone else.
Additionally, in Article 1, Section 5, Congress can determine the rules of its proceedings, and the rules of the House and the Senate make it very difficult for unpopular legislation that constituents would not support to actually get passed into legislation.
Jocelyn, it can be done. The district I live in, I've had to get used to my representative voting against my views every day for years and years, so it can be adjusted.
Oh, I know.
Francine, you want to ask him something?
Sure. Do you think that there are any groups that are still disenfranchised? And if they are, what is causing them to be disenfranchised?
Much of the focus about disenfranchisement in history has focused on racial minorities, but an additional minority who remain fairly systemically disenfranchised today are voters with disabilities. The Voting Access for the Elderly and Handicapped Act of 1984 made some steps to protect these voters, as did HAVA in 2002. However, a survey in 2005 found that still 84% of polling locations had some barriers to vote for voters with disabilities. And so as such, and while HAVA does include particular provisions protecting voters with disabilities, since the law applies to the nation as a whole, the language is necessarily vague, so it can have the greatest application possible. But that has the significant drawback of not applying, of the lack of specificity creating a general problem in that it cannot fix problems. So I think that the responsibility falls better on the states to make allowances and take down the barriers against people with disabilities voting.
There are other additional barriers, such as holding election day on a Tuesday, which is for many people a work day, which creates a possible barrier for getting to the polls, which can be discriminatory against poor people.
Additionally, voter ID laws that seem facially non-discriminatory, however, that have discriminatory effects on those unable to access the required type of voter ID can provide a voting barrier. For example, in the case of Breakville v. Jager in North Dakota, there was a law requiring that voter ID had to have a street address, and Native American reservations were severely hurt by this law.
That comes up a lot in absentee ballot gathering too, especially in our state. I know when you have election officials who are supposed to, as the question said, guarantee fair and free elections, and they use their power in just the opposite way. You had the Secretary of State of Georgia running for governor and using his power as Secretary of State to purge voters that would have been supporting his opponent. And the only real risk he ran was the court telling him to stop. Should there be civil fines when a probate judge or a Secretary of State uses their power to help their own political standing in that way? And if it is, how substantial a fine? $250,000? How substantial a fine, if you think there should be one, should it be to try to at least put some risk to trying to do that?
I don't believe that there should be any fines. I think that a significant check on representatives acting this way is just through the First Amendment right to expression. Individuals can express their discontentment with the way that their representatives are acting, and also through term limits and not getting reelected.
You think Stacey Abrams would agree with you on that?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, who got a lot of her voters purged, would she agree with you or disagree with you on that?
Stacey Abrams would almost certainly disagree with Caroline, and I would too. I think that there should be, I think that while there is no positive right to vote in the Constitution, there are protections in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments that must be obeyed, and I think that any attempts to undermine that should be punished.
I agree. Jocelyn, we got less than a minute. You want one more?
Yeah, can you just clarify when you're talking about term limits? Do we actually have term limits for Congress people in the Constitution?
Sorry, by term limits, I meant limits on the length of term.
Okay. And there's time. Excellent. Thank you. Good job, everyone.
Nice job. So I know, hey, before you get into the feedback, I know we had an issue with Mike's mic for just a few seconds. So Sam, I just want to let you know that we extended the time about 15 or 20 seconds there. And if I know these judges, they probably wish I'd extended another 5 minutes.
At least, or 10.
We'll take that. I feel like that's an offer and we're going to accept it.
We'll take it. Francine, what you think?
Oh, well, I thought it was amazing. What I really liked, I like how you actually started off with the trustee and delegate model at the beginning and explained that, and then said, you know, it really doesn't matter which one you have if you don't have free and fair elections. It's just, it was an interesting way for you to organize it, because usually, as we've been listening to this, the trustee and delegate has been sort of kind of like the afterthought, last thing, I got to throw that in, you know. And I like how you brought that up at the beginning and how you kind of tied it all together. You did a fabulous job with constitutional application, a lot of legislation that you cited, a lot of great court cases. I really liked your response on disenfranchisement. I've kind of been waiting all day for somebody to talk about disabilities as a group that is disenfranchised, and you brought that up, and not only just listed it, but you just had a lot of supporting evidence to back that up. So that was really fabulous and great to hear. And you all did a wonderful job responding to the questions that we had.
So, Jocelyn?
Yeah, great job. I'm glad we got a chance to clarify because I was like, term limits, length of term. I want to make sure that we're all set there. Yeah, your statement was excellent, and going like backwards through the points actually kind of like drops it down and makes us think about it a little differently. So that was really good. I will highlight, what was the one thing? Anyway, yeah, but good answers on court cases. I thought I had something. Sorry, my brain's lost it. But yeah, your use of talking about the Help America Vote Act and the Voting Rights Act, that was very helpful to explain how legislation has been used to accomplish that. And also, in response to Francine's question about groups, you talked about the procedural barriers, but you connected it to how the groups were affected by those kind of procedural barriers, which was something that kind of explains the question, gave an answer, and then went further. So good job on that, because sometimes we've gotten procedural, but it wasn't quite as connected as it could have been. So great job on doing that. For the trustee and delegate thing, yeah, we're all like, I want someone who is completely aligned with my opinion, and we don't ever seem to get that regardless of where we live. Because even for me, like if I'm mostly on board with most of what my congressperson is saying, I'm still like, there's always like those couple issue areas where I'm like, I think you could be better. But you guys did a very good job with that discussion, and I appreciated how you were able to talk about both and challenge my notion that we all should just have delegates. That's just how this goes, right? So thank you very much.
So they vote against us too many times. That's right. I appreciated the specific examples that you gave of the procedural barriers. One, you know, we take some things for granted in many of the states, like voting on Tuesdays. Tuesdays do tend to discriminate against people who work hourly jobs and sometimes 12-hour jobs unless they've mastered the art of early voting or absentee voting. Things that we take for granted in that regard are things, I mean, the new technical changes we may need to make. We need to go up. We don't need to go off and leave the long-standing discriminatory things that were there. I want to say one reassuring thing to Jen. Jen, this is the longest you've ever let Chris work unsupervised in any of these competitions before. We expected that you would be sitting there with him, watching him facilitate, but he's done a pretty good job. He's done all right. So you would be pleased with how he did. To John and to Jen and to Emily, what y'all give us from the state of Virginia with this competition year in and year out is an uplifting thing for all of us who love this competition. This school is a major contributor to it, but you've got a number of schools that are, and it's always a privilege to watch your teams perform. I think they did you proud today, and they were a joy for us to listen to and to get to try to engage in some questions. So to all three of you, and to Samuel, whose quality hasn't slipped a bit. Thank you all for this performance today. And although we don't have a room full of us, let us clap for you one more.